On March 30th, 1982, after its third test flight, the Space Shuttle Columbia landed at White Sands Missile Range. The range participated in the first two flights as a backup landing site. Initially, plans for the third flight called for the Columbia to again land at Edwards Air Force Base in California instead of the White Sands Northrup Strip. Spring rains, however, turned the runway at Edwards into a muddy bog. On March 18, NASA officials announced the end-of-mission landing would take place at White Sands. Suddenly, White Sands personnel found themselves involved in the biggest event of the range's 36-year history. The range immediately shifted into high gear after the announcement. Employees and military personnel from more than half of the range's organizations were involved in preparations. People worked day and night to meet the additional requirements imposed by the change in status. Special equipment and technicians were brought in from Edwards Air Force Base. Plans were put into action to accommodate hundreds of reporters and TV technicians, local and national VIPs, and the public. While White Sands soldiers and civilians worked, the third shuttle mission was launched on March 22nd.
Switching command of the countdown from the ground computers to onboard computers. The development flight instrumentation recorders are on. T-minus 33 seconds and counting. The GOX vent arm is fully retracted, and we're switching control of the countdown to the onboard computers. T-minus 25 seconds. The sequencer on the orbiter is now controlling the final seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 10. We are go for main engine ignition. 8, 7, 6. We have main engine ignition.
During the week of the flight, the range commander, Major General Alan Nord, made the decision to open the missile range to the public for the landing.
NASA officials, I have approved a program to permit the public onto White Sands Missile Range through a single entrance to view the landing of the shuttlecraft. Both NASA officials and I feel the public deserves the opportunity to view this momentous, let's try that, event, a first for White Sands in New Mexico. Unfortunately, the best viewing site which we can make available is in a remote area of the missile range, but within about 5 miles of the Columbia's flight path as it is making its final approach and touchdown at Northrup Strip.
Because of the decision, it was necessary to create a square-mile parking lot in the desert for the expected thousands of cars. In addition, more security and medical personnel were brought in from Fort Bliss, Texas, to help control and aid the crowd. On the morning of March 29th, the scheduled landing day, everything was ready. The runway was graded, watered, and packed. The NASA operations area was completely manned, and technicians were on hand in the deservice area to take care of the shuttle once it landed. The press and VIP areas were crowded with eager viewers. All 3 major television networks were represented, as well as TV and print reporters from all over the United States and the world. The VIPs included New Mexico Senator Harrison Schmitt and the state's governor, Bruce King. Also waiting were thousands of spectators at the public viewing area located about 9 miles from Northrup Strip. High winds on the morning of the 29th, however, postponed the landing until the 30th. Astronaut John Young flew several approaches to the landing field in a training aircraft and determined the conditions were not right. By noon, the blowing dust was so bad it resembled blizzard whiteout conditions. Everyone scattered for some kind of protection against the stinging, blowing gypsum. The morning of March 30th was calm, and all preparations from the 29th were repeated. Everything was go for the landing.
Columbia taking air data now at 81,000. We have a television picture of Columbia on the monitors. 79,000 feet, Mach 2.5, 2.5, range 58 miles. 79,000 feet, Mach 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 2.5,
Columbia, Houston, nav, energy, and ground track are all good. Have an update on winds and weather when you're ready.
Go ahead. A little buffet around Mach 2.
Roger, a high scattered cirrus deck over the field. Surface winds 180 at 11, altimeter 3003. Over.
3003 and roger the wind.
$68,000 feet at Mach 1.6, range 40 miles. Columbia has just passed Truth or Consequences, crossed over Interstate Highway 25, heading toward White Sands. 4 minutes, 40 seconds from touchdown. 60,000 feet, Mach 1.4. Everything looking good at Mach 1 at 50,000 feet, range 27 miles.
Columbia, Houston, reminder on the speed brake, 100%.
Okay, I got him.
Mach 0.9 and speed brakes going to 100% now. 3.5 minutes from touchdown. 38,000 feet. Range 20 miles.
Columbia Chase coming aboard at 28.5. We're at 33, Dick. Okay, we're a little lower than you.
$30,000 feet. Everything looking good. Airspeed
Columbia, Houston,
285.
intersecting the hack now, passing 26,000. Looks good.
2.5 minutes to touchdown. 13 miles range. Turning right now into runway 17 at 20,000 feet. Airspeed 295. Range 10 miles.
Columbia, Houston, winds 190 at 14.
Wind where you go.
Out of 15,000 feet.
Two pappy lines, Houston.
Airspeed
Columbia, Houston,
275.
go for auto to inner glide slope.
Go for auto at 12,000 feet.
Okay, we're in auto, Houston.
Columbia now in auto land. Out of 10,000 feet at 288. Body flaps and trail.
Flash out, flashing.
Roger.
$5,000 feet. Airspeed 280. Range about 3 miles.
Pre-flare, Houston.
Roger.
1,000 feet. Airspeed 292. Still an auto.
50 feet, gear coming.
Comes the gear.
Gear down, 20. 10, 5, 4, touchdown. Nose gears, 10. Nose gears, 5, 4, 3, 3. Touchdown. Bienvenidos, amigos.
The mission elapsed time of touchdown, unofficially 8 days, 0 hours, 4 minutes, 49 seconds.
Okay, wheels are stopped, Houston.
Okay, Columbia, welcome home. That was a beautiful job.
Convoy 1, Columbia, read you loud and clear. How me? Welcome home. Area 5, square 2.
Columbia, Houston, we do have some deltas to the post-landing procedures. The first deltas are the RCS ohm safing for the PLT. And Gordo, just let me know when you get to those steps and I'll get to you.
Okay, we're going to take the gloves and helmets off as it says, and I'll be back with you as soon as they get plugged in.
You bet, we'll just be waiting.
After leaving the Columbia, astronauts Jack Lousma and Gordon Fullerton were taken to the NASA operations area for a quick physical exam and a reunion with their wives. They then went to the press area to meet the VIPs and press representatives. Before the astronauts spoke, NASA Administrator James Beggs talked about the teamwork involved in the mission.
We're very pleased and happy that this event came off so well. There is always a bit of travail in these things, but it's something that we do enormously well in this country, because what we did today was the culmination of a team effort. The two astronauts, Jack Lousma and Gordon Fullerton, of course, the thousands of employees and the contractors who support us in NASA, the Army under General Norrid's leadership that made this all possible, and I must say the Army again proved they can do the near impossible when asked, and the Air Force over at Holloman under Colonel Horner's direction, who supported us all the way. And we're very pleased and proud of all of them. It made this event possible, and it made it a lot of fun for us. We've proven once again that when we want to do it, we can do splendid things and make them look relatively easy. This. And moreover, we do them in full view of the world, in real time, right in front of the television cameras. And there's not another nation on Earth that can make that statement. I'm very pleased to have these two astronauts back with us, and we welcome both of them back to Mother Earth. We're very happy that Gracia and Marie lent them to us for 8 days, one more day than they expected they would lend them to us. But we're glad to have them back. President Theodore Roosevelt once said, the greatest prize in life is to work at work worth doing, and these two men have earned that prize. Come up and talk to us now.
It's great to be on the ground here at White Sands. This is my first time. I've been about this high off the ground 700 times, but I've never been on the ground here. Being a golfer, I wish I'd brought my sand wedge. I think I could get pretty good out here playing out of sand traps. Yesterday wasn't such a good day. We noticed that too. Gordo said, "Hey, look out the window," just after we got waved off, and there was the white sands. I think it was anyway. We couldn't see it because it was obliterated with a blizzard of sand. So you made the right choice. But we think it's remarkable and it's commendable that our hats are off to you. It's a tribute to you to see how the several elements of a great team have...
While the astronauts were being hailed, technicians were busy deservicing the shuttle. After the initial checks, the Columbia was towed to the deservice area where it stayed until April 6. The shuttle was placed under the stiff-legged derrick which is used to lift the spacecraft onto the back of a 747 for the flight back to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. On April 5th, Columbia was lowered and mated to the 747. Early in the morning of April 6th, the 747 made a long run down the Northrup Strip with its load and left White Sands. Astronauts Jack Lousma and Gordon Fullerton flew into White Sands again on May 17 to thank all the range personnel who helped make the landing a success. They were accompanied by their wives and Senator Harrison Schmitt. Before the astronauts' visit, Schmitt had sponsored a bill in Congress to rename Northrup Strip. The bill passed and was signed by President Reagan on May 11th, changing the name to White Sands Space Harbor. The group's first stop was at John F. Kennedy Parade Field, where the astronauts were scheduled to speak. Colonel Dan Duggan, White Sands Deputy Commander, acted as host for the party and introduced them to the audience. Each astronaut took the podium to thank the members of the audience for their help in getting the Columbia safely back on Earth. Afterwards, Lousma and Fullerton entered the crowd and shook hands and signed autographs. The guest party then traveled to the White Sands Post School. There, the astronauts talked briefly to the children.
We can tell you, and so we're really looking forward to another chance to go.
This guy right down here, the yellow. Oh, you'd love to be in space. I know if every one of you had a chance, you'd just love to be there, you'd want to stay. And a lot of you will have the opportunity in the future if you keep studying hard and so forth, but just to being able to float is just something that's just unusual.
Next, Lousma and Fullerton went to the Post Theater, where they were greeted by the applause of a packed house.
Astronaut and Mrs. Gordon Fullerton.
The ladies, if they'd like to move down in front, and they can watch their husbands perform.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be back here. We came back to say thank you for all the help that White Sands Missile Range gave to us during the preparation for the landing of the Columbia and for the actual landing. It was a decision that was made fairly late in the game. We know that all of you here were praying for rain in California, and it worked. You have a direct line to the rainmaker, and whatever you did, it worked, and it worked out good for us too. White Sands, of course, is the place where we practice And when we were given the option of landing here, or it was discussed with us, we said we were very comfortable with that idea, and there was really no decision to make. This was the place for us to come, and we felt that day in the landing day too. The day before, we didn't feel that way so much, I don't think. But the extra day in space gave us an opportunity to finally enjoy being up there, to look out the window, and to contemplate the landing on the next day. In fact, we could have stayed there a few more days and enjoyed it very much. That was our favorite vacation spot, and if you were in your favorite vacation spot, you'd like to be told you could stay there too. I've seen every service represented here, the Army, of course, the Air Force, of course, the Navy I've seen, and I finally saw a Marine. Now we've got them surrounded. I want to tell you that this was a team effort. Gordo and I didn't do this job by ourselves. Thousands of people around the country made this happen, and it's to them we give the credit, and you're a part of that team, and it's to you we give the credit also. And we want you to know how important we think you are as a member of that team, and my guess is that you'll have an opportunity to do this again, and I hope you do. The other part of our team, of course, is right out in the audience. Our wives, our kids couldn't be here with us today, but we have a family team effort as well, and so we feel like we've had a real privilege, a real opportunity to do something that few people have, but we're supported by the greatest teams that could be put together. We also realize that the Army went to a lot of effort in a short period of time to make this an acceptable landing spot for the Columbia. And when we left on March 22, and when we left town at the Cape, it wasn't clear that anybody was going to get to see the launch, or the landing rather, here at White Sands, because of security problems and for other reasons. Although Jack Schmidt was down there, and he was assuring us that people would get to see the landing. And we didn't know what was going to happen, and we didn't really know what would happen until we landed. And between the time we left, the time we got back, he had cleared the way, along with the Army, to make it possible for the general public to come in and see the landing of the Columbia. And I want to tell you, people are really enthusiastic, and I know that you know that more than anybody else now, but the American people are really proud of this program, and you enable them to have an opportunity to express that pride, Senator Schmidt and the Army, and all involved, to make it an opportunity where they could come and express that pride in watching the Columbia land. I think, without further ado, I'll ask Gordo Field to introduce the film, and we'll show you a film about the flight of the Columbia, the third flight.
Glad to, Jack. Thank you, Colonel Duggan, for setting this up for us to have this chance to talk to you this morning, and thank you to Senator Jack for arranging the whole tour of New Mexico. We've been in Albuquerque yesterday, we'll be over in Alamogordo tomorrow, and we're getting a real taste of the really warm and gracious hospitality that everybody in this state puts out for everyone, us certainly included. Senator Schmidt and I were classmates in college. We then got back together, and when I was assigned to NASA, he was an astronaut and flew in space before either Jack or I. And I want you to understand, if there's any doubt in your mind, that he is one of the staunchest supporters of the space program and the Department of Defense, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and Marines too. And especially those efforts of the Department of Defense in the state of New Mexico. Well, anyway, let's talk about STS-3, the third flight of the Space Shuttle. That was the third in a series of 4 missions, the final one to launch on the 27th of June, and if the flight plan holds, they'll land on the 4th of July this summer. Those 4 were designated the orbital flight test, and the primary purpose of those 4 missions was to test out the orbiter and the entire space shuttle system and clear it for operational use. Our primary goal in orbit was to look at the thermal stress effects on the orbiter. By thermal stress, I mean that we maintained an attitude, constant attitude with respect to the sun, which heated up one side of the vehicle and cooled down the shady side. We saw temperatures on the order of plus 200 degrees on the hot side and minus 200 on the cold side. And this had been predicted to be a real strain on some of the systems on board, especially those that contain fluids. The hydraulic system, the propellant tanks have to be either heated or cooled to maintain the fluids in an appropriate liquid state, and that takes electricity to do so. And so our limiting consumable on the flight was hydrogen, which is combined with oxygen to make the electricity to operate those systems. It looked like pre-flight that we'd have to really conserve things carefully to make a full 7-day mission. One of the real pleasant surprises of the flight was that after 7 days we were way ahead on our budget of hydrogen. In fact, we had enough for the extra day that we stayed in orbit, plus 3 more on a pad after that. There were many other bits of good news as far as the results of the tests. I think we'll roll the movie now and tell you about some of those as we go along.
Many of you were able to attend the launch, and we hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did, although I'm sure that the view was not quite as unique. Here's a picture of the big bird sitting on the pad with the vertical assembly building in the background. We had banker's hours on this flight. We were able to get up around 5 or 6 in the morning, get suited up, make sure our suits worked okay, and walk out. We took one look at the big bird just before we walked into it, got on the swing arm and walked across and got strapped in. Helped the ground crew check out the spacecraft, and promptly at 11 she lifted off.
When the main engines ignited, there was a certain amount of shaking and rattling that was obvious. I was wondering if the solids had ignited, but when they touch off, there's no doubt. There's a tremendous feeling of commotion and power down there behind you, and a relentless push that just adds up to the ride of a lifetime. There's nothing that will ever even remotely approach the feeling of first stage on the solids. From my right-hand window, lying on the back, this is the view. If you turned your head 90 degrees to the right and watched, had a camera pointed out that way, you can see the roll maneuver. Then we went into the very thin overcast and quickly popped out the top.
Like Gordo said, it was the ride of a lifetime, lots of vibration, lots of dynamics, and just a relentless push for 8.5 minutes into orbit. Just was a continuous, compelling, relentless acceleration and push all the way up there. We were able to perform our functions and talk and do our job, but we knew we had a tiger by the tail. The first stage, of course, burned for about 2 minutes and 6 seconds. I understand you had a good view of it as it came out the top of this cloud, a very spectacular shot. We were VFR on top, as the pilots say, very quickly with very little actual instrument time. The roll maneuver was performed precisely, and we got the separation of the solid rocket motors at 2 minutes and 6 seconds, and we didn't feel it or hear it, but we did see that flash of flame around the cockpit as the solid rockets were jettisoned and parachuted into the ocean, where they were picked up so that they can be refurbished and used again. This is a close-up picture of the solid rocket motor breaking away from the external tank.
It's interesting that as soon as the solids burn out and are jettisoned, everything smooths out absolutely as smooth as glass. It's the nicest ride, smoother than any airliner any of you have ever flown on.
We got the main engine cut off at 8 minutes and 34 seconds. We waited for the external tank to be jettisoned. This is an underneath picture of the tank being jettisoned and falling away from the spacecraft. Shortly thereafter, we ignited the maneuvering engines to put us into orbit. We made 2 firings of the orbital maneuvering system. So after about 45 minutes, we were in orbit and able to open the payload bay doors.
If you look quickly, that's Los Angeles, the South Bay, Palos Verdes Peninsula, then on down to San Diego. Then a few seconds later, that's the Salton Sea and the Imperial Valley in California, which greeted us as we opened that first payload bay door.
The sight was as spectacular for us as it was for you, and as you see it in these pictures here. It was truly a a momentous event for us, and most impressive. The pictures and the memories don't do it justice. You just have to go back and do it again in order to appreciate it fully. The morning of the first day was when we first got the remotely controlled arm made by the Canadians into business.
Second day, actually, Jack, if you remember. And Jack had discovered some tile missing out in front of the windshield. If you notice those square, irregular patches in front of the windshield, those are actual missing white tile. So we moved the arm up and got it over to the right-hand side and looked along on a kind of a grazing angle here, but had a view and found some more tile missing. However, those were relatively insignificant. As it turned out, on entry, I've heard the number that the highest temperature noted on the top in the area of the missing tile was only 140 degrees or so.
Actually, the tile didn't slow us down much. We knew that lots of people would be concerned about it, and so we erased it from our thought and went on to do the other business. We did have some venting from one of the main engines that was with us for about 2 to 3 days, which we reported, and it was determined what the venting was. This is the way it looked, however, when the sunlight shone on it with a dark background, and as I mentioned, after about 2 or 3 days, it went away.
Now an inside shot. I'm at the manipulator operator station, and Jack has taken this movie right here as I brought the plasma diagnostics package out of the payload bay for the first time. We put the manipulator arm through the loaded operations, that is, with an attached payload for the first time in its ever, and exercised all the very complex sequences that the manipulator arm has built into it. Some of those involve manually positioning the arm, others with the software doing it automatically, and our job merely to monitor for safety considerations. We operated the arm night and day, so when the sun went down, we turned on lights in the payload bay and found that they were adequate to see it visually as well as operate our television system.
Periodically, it would show up in the overhead window as you see it pictured here, and then it would be moved to the forward part of the spacecraft up over the nose to make some measurements, and it was spectacular to watch it come real close and silently but smoothly move to its next point in the sequence, and this gives you the full appreciation of the total spectacle of the background. This is a picture that was taken as we were going over the Baja Peninsula in an ascending pass over the United States.
I'm bringing the plasma diagnostic package back in to latch it back down in its mounting mechanism. And this was one of the big questions on the flight, how well that mechanism would work. We found that the task was much easier than it had been done during any of the ground tests. In fact, the whole thing, which had been anticipated and planned to take maybe as much as 30 minutes, we did on 3 separate occasions in less than 5 minutes each time. And finally, here you see the arm being put back down in its cradle, its mounting mechanism, this in a backup mode, which is the crudest mode. One, if the whole primary system failed, we tested that backup mode and found that that whole thing of cradling the arm and rolling it inboard, as we're doing here, was very easily done, even with the lack of instrumentation that the backup system gives you.
One of the things we really enjoyed the most about being there was the ability to get around very quickly and easily. We could be anywhere in the spacecraft in a flash, and this is the head-first approach down through the hatch and down to the mid-deck where we had these stowage lockers in which we had lots of apparatus, equipment, clothing, and books and other kinds of things that we needed. If you didn't like the head-first approach, you could always do the feet-first one and glide down just about that quickly and be right where Mission Control wanted you to be. We had a number of experiments in the cabin to take care of. This is the plant growth unit that operated perfectly through the entire mission. We would read the temperature in the 6 plant growth compartments 3 times a day and read those back to the ground. One of the things that you'd all enjoy is the ability to manage packages very readily and easily up there. No need to set anything down, you just leave it float in space.
Here I'm working the electrofluoresis experiment. I've taken one of the sample columns after it's been frozen in the main apparatus and stowing it in a holder and putting it back in a liquid nitrogen cooled freezer that we had that kept that frozen throughout the remainder of the flight and the trip back to Houston.
We had a hygiene area in which we could wash up, shave, brush our teeth, and so forth, and we had soap and running water, so it was very easy to keep yourself clean. And here's a picture of Gordo establishing himself in that area. And why don't you move the coat there, Gordo, and get it out of the way? Thank you. And of course, one of the things Gordo had to do was brush his hair every morning. Eating was a real pleasure, of course. It's impossible to knock your milk off the table up there, kiddos. There's no way to get in trouble with Mom. You just leave things float around, and when you want them, you just grab them out of thin air, and you can eat standing on your head or however you please.
When you say eating was a real pleasure and you hear it from Jack Lousma, you can believe it. He really means it.
Most of the food that we had was mixed with water, and then we had a heater we could put it in if we wanted to make it warm. We had an exerciser on board that we used a couple of times, and we could position ourselves on it. It was a treadmill which was self-propelled, and get our exercise with no hands.
In the 10 minutes I ran on this treadmill, I think we should figure out the number. Something like 3,000 miles we traveled.
Here's a man who ran 3,000 miles in just a few minutes. But this was a new device that was added for this flight, and we think it performed very well and be a good addition for future flights. And we used it 2 different times.
We took the whole exercise thing very seriously. As you'll see, this was not the only thing we did to keep in shape.
Of course, you have to create work for yourself up in space. Your body does less work up there than it does when you're just lying in bed sleeping against the force of gravity. So we had to devise a number of exercise routines. Weightlifting and balancing act here. Now, not many of you can do this right here. He doesn't put them on one leg at a time like everybody else.
As soon as I get this down, I'm going to get a Dorothy Hamill wig and try out for the ice bucket.
And, of course, Marines aren't happy unless they do their push-ups every day. That wasn't too tough, so, you know, look, one arm. And if you want to, you can do foot-ups. Now, if you really got frustrated, you could do this. Well, you really can see we didn't do much work up there, and finally came time to come home. So we got the payload bay doors closed and got a wave off for mission control. But finally the next day they decided they'd bring us in anyway, and here are a few shots that many of you were able to witness from the ground personally of the orbiter making its approach and landing at White Sands, Northrup Strip there.
Near Holloman Air Force Base. We provided lots of support for the whole operation there.
The entry was as spectacular as the boost was in terms of dynamics and sensation and excitement and high adventure. It was a machine that slowed down from 25 times the speed of sound to 0 in about 25 to 30 minutes. And it felt like it just had the brakes on all the way, and we had one of the most spectacular quick tours at low altitude and high speed of the United States anybody will ever have. The airplane was flown manually from about 40,000 feet down to about 10,000 feet. Here's a picture out Gordo's window of what he saw from inside.
We're just rolled into the right bank, turning the 90-degree turn from our approach heading onto final approach. And as you see the white sands come into view and look closely, the runway will become visible, but then go out of sight again. There's the approach to the runway right there. But because of the strong westerly wind, we had to crab to the right. Right now, Jack is engaging the audio system, and you can see it making a quick correction to the right, then back to the left. But with that correction for the wind drift, it's hiding the view of the runway until we get down here a little closer, and you'll be able to see our aim point come into view. You'll see a triangle and a rectangle. We were actually aiming for the rectangle, and there's some lights in there, not readily visible till just about now, that helped us determine that the guidance system had us exactly on the proper glide slope.
Okay, we got it firmly established on the inner glide slope, and then took over manually and made the landing and the rollout. We used the whole runway, although we didn't have to. It would have been possible to have stopped much sooner had it been necessary. And here is a final shot of the final part of the approach. Gordo got the wheels down at 275 knots, right on the money. And we broke the rate of descent right in here, and then landed and made the rollout. I noticed that the nose wheel was going down a little more quickly than I wanted it to, and had to hold it off some. In doing so, I over-rotated a little bit, kind of popped a wheelie there, but no harm done. And the Columbia made a good smooth rollout. At the end of it, we made a little nose wheel steering test and stopped it before the end of the drawn-out runway, although, as I mentioned, we just used very light braking and could have stopped it much more quickly. We assisted the ground personnel in securing the spacecraft and shutting down some of the systems. Finally, they decided to let us out, in spite of the fact that we wanted to stay a little longer, and met the sunshine there at the White Sands Missile Range. And we apparently picked the right time to come because the wind kind of abated and let up for us, although it picked up later. The support at White Sands was incredible, and it was a great team effort with NASA, contractor people, and the Department of Defense to provide landing opportunity there in a very short time. So it's a tribute to our whole American team for the way that the final part of our flight worked out.
The fourth stop for the astronauts was the Post Officers Club. They shared lunch with about 450 people, and again thanked all White Sands personnel for their help during the successful mission.
Thank you for this overwhelming show of friendliness and hospitality. We believe this is a special event. We're overwhelmed. I'd like to do one thing that I have never done much before. I realized that on the Skylab flight I flew on, there were 3 guys, and I was a junior man. And I always got to talk last, and the other 2 guys would always say everything I wanted to say. And I've been doing that with Gordon Fullerton for about a month now. I'm going to let him talk first. And you got 5 minutes.
A number of years ago, there was a comedian, his name was Bill Dana, and he had a routine where he took the part of an astronaut being interviewed, and one of the mock questions that he was asked was, what have they provided for your re-entry to Earth, coming back as your spacecraft hurtles at hypersonic speeds back into the atmosphere? And then he would pause for a couple minutes, and then he would say, the state of Nevada. Well, Jack and I want to thank you for providing the state of New Mexico for our return. It certainly was a glorious sight each time we went over. I have mentioned it on our stops earlier today, but the White Sands stand out like a beacon from orbit. They are it's the most easily recognized landmark in all of the United States. It was clear just by a glance as we were going by each time. And then on the final entry, when we came by Phoenix and Tucson at lower altitude, we very quickly, and about 5 minutes later, looked up ahead, saw Elephant Butte Reservoir out by Two the Consequences, but the White Sands just beyond, and there was no doubt we were right on course on our way into the White Sands Space Harbor. Marie and I have been overwhelmed by the hospitality we've experienced from the moment we arrived in Albuquerque yesterday afternoon, and then here in the Las Cruces and Wismar area today. We're looking forward to Alamogordo tomorrow. We want to thank you again for everything you've done in the way of supporting the mission and making this part of our post-flight activities just as wonderful and as interesting and as a memorable occasion that it is. Thank you very much.
Touchdown. Nose gears 10. Nose gears 5, 4, 3, 3. Touchdown. Bienvenidos, amigos.